Hello, Raptors fans. We're back. Except Fred. He's gone. Forever. He's never coming back. Except technically one game a year when he's back in Toronto. So, the leader of the Toronto Raptors, Fred VanVleet, has decided to skip town and join Ime Udoka in Houston and kind of left the Raptors in a bit of a lurch. The Raptors responded by signing his replacement, Dennis Schroeder. But the direction of the team still remains very much a mystery. In today's episode, we're going to be examining a lot of different things. Number one, why did Fred VanVleet leave? Number two, are the Raptors going to be okay? Number three, is Fred VanVleet worth $40 million per season? Number four, how am I going to get rid of my 700 Fred VanVleet Raptors bobbleheads? Lots of really tough 9 questions that you need the answers to. So without any further ado, let's jump right in. Fred VanVleet has left the Raptors. After 7 years with the franchise, where he rose from an undrafted bench player to a key member of a championship team to an all-star, Fred has been a central figure on the Toronto Raptors and the vocal leader of the team after the departure of Kyle Lowry in 2021. After a brief negotiation period with the Raptors and the Houston Rockets, Fred decided to take Houston's offer and become a Rocket, taking their generous $84 million over 2 years versus the Raptors' rumored $120 million over 4 years. Fred leaving in free agency is obviously a huge blow to the Raptors, who, as I've mentioned many times over the past 2 seasons, had very poor guard depth to begin with. With Fred now gone, the Raptors have arguably the worst guard rotation in the NBA, as of the release of this video at least. There are a couple of things that I want to cover in this video, but I'll begin with the contract itself. The contract he received from Houston is a calculated overpayment, designed to be so rich that it would be too expensive for the Raptors to match on a per-year basis without going into the luxury tax. The Raptors attempted to counter by offering a longer contract, but that strategy was ultimately unsuccessful in convincing Fred to stay. There was a lot of reporting at the time the deal was signed that made it appear like Fred got 3 full years from the Rockets at $40+ million per year, but it later came out that the final year of his deal is a team option, which will only be picked up if somehow Fred's production warrants that price tag, which I doubt, but even if it does, the 3rd year is all downside for Fred. What that means is that rather than being blown out of the water by the Rockets, the Raptors allegedly made a pretty competitive offer of $120 over 4 years. What this tells me is that Fred was ready to move on and explore a different opportunity. One factor that I think helped contribute to his decision was Nick Nurse's departure. Nurse has always been a Fred believer, trusting the diminutive guard to start at shooting guard alongside Kyle Lowry, and even making the tough call to continue playing Fred through his struggles during the Raptors' championship run when almost everyone was calling for him to be benched. Nurse riding Fred and playing him a league-high minutes per game helped him achieve his first All-Star berth 2 seasons ago, although it also might have contributed to the injuries that plagued him in the subsequent playoffs and beginning of this past regular season. In the aftermath of Nurse's firing, Fred used social media to support his former boss, with one post praising him for landing the 76ers coaching job and an appearance on a podcast where he said that the losses the Raptors endured this past season and the changed trajectory of the franchise contributed to them losing Nurse and himself. He also made a point to mention in his farewell post that he noticed the uptick in criticism from the fan base, saying that he went from one of the most loved Raptors to the most hated. Overall, I think that many factors contributed to Fred deciding to leave, but obviously the largest was that Houston simply offered the bigger per-year deal, and thus the ultimate bet-on-yourself guy decided to gamble that he could take the bigger money up front and worry about getting another contract after that one had finished. Security be damned. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How good is Fred VanVleet? Is he worth the contract he got? How will this impact the Raptors going forward? First, Fred VanVleet is a good player when he's healthy. At the end of last season and the beginning of this past one, Fred struggled. His defense had fallen off, his shot was not dropping regularly, and he did not adjust his shot diet to account for the lack of accuracy on his jumper. Fred would have a strong game, scoring 30+ one evening, and then have a horrific game the next, where he would have more field goal attempts than points. It was pretty clear that Fred was dealing with a number of injuries, the most prominent being back spasms. His struggles, paired with the lack of competent backup point guard options for the Raptors, meant that the team also struggled. With the losses, the social media scapegoating became pretty intense, with Fred being the primary focus. Towards the end of the season, he started to turn things around, probably recovering from his injuries and having great games, including one where he had 20 assists, setting a franchise record. On the flip side, Fred's shoot-first mentality as a point guard looks great when the shots are dropping, and it gets pretty darn ugly when the shots don't go in. We can have discussions about whether Fred is worth the contract he signed, but I think if Houston is getting a healthy Fred VanVleet, and with the rising cap, they probably won't care a ton if they overpaid a bit to get him. Where the contract could get messy is if Fred's injury troubles continue. Fred is a 29-year-old guard who is generously listed at 6 feet tall, and his rugged two-way game involves putting his body in harm's way and requires a huge expenditure of energy. He's also racked up a ton of minutes over the past few seasons. Betting on him returning to pre-injury form is a bit of a gamble, especially on the defensive end. It is clearly a risk on the part of the Rockets, but if you put any stock into advanced statistics, Fred was one of, if not the best Raptor this past season. 538's Raptor stat, the publicly available Darko stat, and dunksandthrees.com's EPM stat all list Fred as the best player on the Raptors this past season, even with this being a down season for him. Personally, although I can't prove it, I think that part of the reason Fred's advanced stats look so darn good is because since Kyle Lowry's departure, the Raptors have had essentially no other rotation caliber point guards, meaning that when he comes off the floor, the team looks absolutely god-awful. One of the main ingredients in all of these advanced stats are adjusted plus-minus figures, and when your backups are not good, you are going to appear like Superman in comparison. His stats were also quite good when Lowry was here as well, so I don't think it's a complete mirage, but maybe he's getting a little lift there compared to some of his peers. And that leads to my next point. How does this impact the Raptors? In terms of next season, it's not looking too hot. Unless a major deal is done between now and training camp, which is possible, the Raptors will have the worst guard rotation in the league. Dennis Schroeder was signed to a 2-year, $24 million contract on the heels of a strong playoff run with the Lakers, but I'm not moved very much by that signing. Schroeder, by all accounts, is a very middling player who is best suited to a backup role on a competing team. He would have been great this past season and the year before that as a guy who can come in and eat up minutes and score the ball at the guard position, but if he's your starting point guard, you're probably not going to be winning many games. Fred also brought one very in-demand ingredient to the Raptors, which was shooting. Although his percentages don't reflect it, this season at least, Fred's ability to shoot a high volume of three-point shots, many of them self-created, was a key ingredient in keeping the Raptors afloat. When they were going in, the Raptors actually had a functioning offense, and when they didn't, like in many games this season, the Raptors sunk. Schroeder is a career 34% shooter from 3, and doesn't take many of them, and the ones he does takes are catch and shoot rather than created by himself, meaning that one of the main weaknesses of the Raptors, which was shooting, was not addressed by the signing. Schroeder is a pretty good defender, and he does pressure defenses, using screens to get into the middle of the defense and scoring with pull-up jump shots and push shots. He also does something that the Raptors need from the guard spot, which is drawing fouls and shooting free throws. He's always been good at getting to the line, and he's a career 85% at the stripe. Overall, it's not a horrible signing, just not someone I would have prioritized if I were looking for a guard for the Toronto Raptors. In terms of the big picture, I'm not really sure what the plan is. The front office's decision to add to the core at last season's deadline is looking more and more tenuous. With Fred leaving for nothing, not getting something, anything for him at the trade deadline appears to be a major misstep. It looks like the team pivoted in the wrong direction, and a pivot towards a rebuild might have gotten them more assets to build with moving forward. I have a feeling that a major trade, perhaps one involving Pascal Siakam, is on the horizon that might help make sense of what direction the Raptors are moving in. But I have to say that at the moment, Fred's departure has created a ton of question marks. And that's this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. What do you guys think about Fred VanVleet's departure? Did you love his time in Toronto? Did you hate it? Do you fall somewhere in the middle? Very divisive topic. Also, what do you think about Dennis Schroeder? Do you think that he's going to fill in Fred VanVleet's shoes? Do you think maybe he's another free agency strikeout by the Raptors front office? Let me know here in the comments and also on Twitter, where you can reach me at Raptors Report. Do you think that the Raptors are going to make any more moves between now and training camp? That's another great question. Lots of really interesting developments that are still to come, and I'm very interested to see what the answer to many of the unanswered questions that are lingering on the Toronto Raptors roster. So very excited to see that play out, and very excited to see you guys again in the next episode, and I hope you tune in. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and also leave a comment on the video because it helps out and helps the channel grow. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.